Good evening and welcome to this live stream of Newcastle United's reaction to Newcastle United's defeat to West Ham at St James's Park this evening. Not sure that anyone quite expected that, but Newcastle United have been beaten 2-0 at home by West Ham this evening. Real missed opportunity. I'll just wait for some people to join the chat. Once you've joined, like the chat as usual, and then put something in the like the stream as usual, put something in the chat and we can get going. Really disappointing performance, as I'm sure we'll get into. I don't really know how to explain. I think going into the game, it was kind of one of those, and it is dangerous when the sort of narrative is so one-sided for a team, I think. But I can't think of many games where it was so one-sided in the predictions. I mean, Theo Walcott on Sky Sports Monday Night Football, was asked point blank to give West Ham a chance this evening and rejected to do so just before kickoff. That sort of shows you all you want to know really about where Newcastle, what was expected of Newcastle this evening. I fully expected it, and it didn't happen. But we can talk about that over the next sort of half an hour, 45 minutes or so. Once you've joined, please do like the chat to help boost it as usual, and then we'll get going. But yeah, in terms of the performance, as I say, it was a really strange what happened after the first goal. So Newcastle started really well. Then what happened after that first goal? I've rarely seen anything like it. Even by Newcastle standards of sort of, and we're sort of used to this of Newcastle from this sort of lack of poor mentality. It's been seen even in this current era. This team has often struggled with that sort of mentality side of things. But straight away, after that goal from Souček, which came after a really strong start for Newcastle, a goal disallowed for a marginal offside against Alexander Isak. Anthony Gordon had a shot. They were really pressurising a narrow West Ham defence that was really there to be got at. It looked like in the first sort of 5, 10, 15 minutes. And then suddenly, when Souček scores, Newcastle just lost all confidence, lost all organisation. West Ham found it and then settled in and made it count ultimately in that performance, in that sort of set. That I think that 5 minutes really did set the tone for the rest of the game, because West Ham got some semblance of organisation. And then in the second half, when Newcastle started strongly after bringing Harvey Barnes on, and then West Ham scored again through Aaron Wan-Bissaka, and then Lucas Paquetá was Carlos Soler was getting on the ball, and that was a pinpoint I put on Blue Sky before the game, that I thought that was where Newcastle were going to win the game this evening. It was going to come from that midfield. West Ham didn't play a defensive player. They had Souček as the sort of, you would look at that midfield and say he was the holding player, but he's not very mobile. He's obviously quite tall, but you can get round him, you can put pressure on him, you can break the lines. And obviously having Joe Willock in that side, given what he'd done to Forest, that was where a lot of my sort of pre-match expectation for Newcastle was coming from. And then it just turned really sour from about 15 minutes in, and then from the second half it flipped. It paid off that Lopetegui played such an attacking, bold midfield, because every time the ball was bouncing back, it was coming back to Paquetá, who was playing all over that midfield and really sort of doing everything that his best friend Bruno Guimaraes wasn't for Newcastle. Bruno obviously came off and went down the tunnel, which isn't good news. Hopefully it's not too serious what's happening, the situation with him. But yeah, very, very poor performance for Newcastle in this game, and it's as I say, it's a bit. I'm back to square one. It's easy with these games and these things to say that that you come away and you say, like, this is what it should be. This, you make sweeping statements after games, and then these sorts of things happen, and you think it looks a little bit silly, and that's And that's kind of how it feels. You know, you think Newcastle turned a corner. They did what they did to Nottingham Forest, and they did what they did to Chelsea at home in the cup and Arsenal at home. And he thought, you know, West Ham, this is a good game to come and play, more because of what West Ham were coming into this game playing. Was and what they were doing was, you know, and how poor they'd been was really where I think a lot of confidence was coming from. Because and given that Newcastle had Isak in great form, obviously that brilliant War Flags display before the game, clearly to try and make a point, he started really brightly and then just sort of disappeared across the game. RM says the change to 4-4-2 was a big moment, lost the balance. Yeah, I think at that stage it was kind of a bit beyond sort of trying anything. It was just trying anything to sort of see if it would stick, I guess, wasn't it? And seeing how it would work for Newcastle to try and get a way back into the game. But I think the midfield issue there, the 4-4-2, what it was able to do was give Paquetá the space to drop deep and dictate and have that space in the midfield. I agree with that. Jamie has agreed and says that he does worry that Eddie Howe's a bit scared to sub Bruno when I think he needs it. Time to bring Sandro back into that role. That's a really fair point actually that Jamie's made. I think for me, because that was what Tonali was brought in for last summer, was to try and take the load off Bruno, and it's never actually been that case where he's ever been given that. It's always trying to play them together, which naturally you would try and do because they're two brilliant footballers. But there is times where that, you know, that was kind of called for, and it was the same with Livramento and Trippier last season. There was lots of, like, you know, Livramento was brought in to sort of take the heat off Trippier, and Trippier was playing so much by the time it got to December, he was so tired that he lost his form, dropped off a cliff, and it was kind of, maybe that's what we're sort of seeing, because Bruno wasn't his usual self. Tonali for Willock was the obvious sub, says RM, and I think the thing I would say about that is, I think I said after the game, I think from the City ground, I didn't do a live after the game at Forest because I was at the game, and I did a video from the pitch side at City ground. And I said I think actually lots of this debate about how to get Willock into the team is, should it be Willock or Longstaff or Tonali, and Tonali as well. Tonali and Longstaff, should it be? Should Longstaff come in out for one of those two? It's actually, I think it's a choice between one or the other at the moment, and that I thought stylistically, as I say, it's a bit inexplicable as to why Willock looked so leggy in that first half. He looked rusty. Joe Linton seemed like his form had dropped off a cliff after that brilliant performance that he put in at Forest. You know, it is quite easy and simplistic to say that the break came at a bad time, because of course it did, but doesn't really excuse this. I know that's what we're sort of here to do, is dissect it and break it down, and I'll do my my usual analysis video when I've had time to sort of think it through tomorrow. But I actually think I'm back to sort of thinking that this is kind of just on. I think West Ham did well with what they got after the goal. I think when they went a goal up, credit Lopetegui, that defense was really, really shaky in the first 15 minutes. It was scared. It went now. There was a point where Anthony Gordon, I think 2 or 3 minutes in, got the ball with acres of space on the left, and you think someone would come out and stop that, come out and clear that, and nobody did. And it was because they were basically trying to make the pitch compact and make it difficult to get into the area. But Newcastle were carving through them in the first 15 minutes because they had their tails up. What I find that really disappointing, and I think beyond all the tactical things that we can talk about, because I agree with the 4-4-2 shout, and I think that Tonali for Bruno is a great point from Jamie, and I do think that Tonali coming on for whoever he comes on for in the second half is extremely predictable from Eddie Howe. We've said that before, and that's a very fair point. But for me, it's about the mentality of that team after going 1-0 down. They fell apart like a pack of cards. It was horrendous to watch how it happened in the sort of 5-10 minutes after the goal. And And actually, it happened straight away after the second goal as well. I think Bowen goes through and has a shot on target for that Pope saves just 2 minutes after Wan-Bissaka scored. Why is it that when Newcastle concede a goal, and it seems to happen quite often actually in other games as well. I'd be really interested to see a stat about this: how many shots on target, or how many successful take-ons from an opposition player, how many openings on goal, any of those sorts of stats immediately after conceding a goal that Newcastle put in, and then of course then their organisation goes and they collapse. They did recover a little bit. They recovered themselves fairly well in terms of getting onto the ball and creating, sort of getting into decent positions. But 2 shots on target from John. That's a really good point. John has made a really excellent point. 2 shots on target. Is sort of emblematic, I think, of the fact that their structure and their aim that they had plenty of in the first 15 minutes. As I say, like I said, I think I was sort of I expected a comfortable 2-3-0 victory. And if you listen on the True Faith podcast preview before the game that I did, I said 2-0. A couple of us, everyone on the panel predicted a victory. But I did sort of warn that I'm not comfortable with this sort of like this unanimous idea of Newcastle winning the game comfortably, because the last time this happened was Southampton, and they sort of hobbled over the line with the red card for Schär on the opening day. But it wasn't a convincing performance. And but the first 15 minutes went exactly how I expected them to do. I thought they would go that way. I thought that Newcastle would dominate the ball, would play through West Ham as they did, stretch them. Isak would get onto the ball. All of those things happened. And then as soon as they conceded the goal, everything just went collapse. And also, at the same time, West Ham managed to find themselves a little bit more of a foothold in the game, because their defensive line was more structured. Wan-Bissaka was brilliant defensively in the first half. He had much more of an impact in the second half going forward. Soler, as I say, and Paquetá and Souček should be on paper the ideal midfield for Newcastle to attack, because especially given that they've done things that they've performed in ways that made them susceptible in previous games as well. I mean, Soler's last performance was in the League Cup against Liverpool, and they lost 5-1 or something. And none of them are quick, none of them are particularly energetic, none of them are particularly defensive minded. So if you can get them on the half turn and press them and counter press them and create and exploit the space that they would inevitably give, you can have a field day. And it never got to that stage, because as soon as it did, Newcastle's midfield, the team just shrunk at its level. It was really, really poor. And once the game had settled into a new pattern, almost within 5 minutes, as I say, of the goal, Newcastle struggled to break it. Bruno didn't get onto the ball high enough up the pitch. I thought he was really poor tonight, to be honest, by his standards. Gordon went missing after that sort of promising first 5 minutes. And then, Isak couldn't get involved as well. And when he did, he snapped at that chance. That Bruno, that one lovely little ball from Bruno in the first half that found Isak, and he takes it down and then he puts it wide, sort of was really poor. I thought John says there was a passes play in the second half that summed it up. West Ham played about 30 passes to Ole when we won the ball back. We lost it after one pass. Yeah, I think old things about the possession and Newcastle coming back again. And Jamie says that was happening often near the end. Jamie also said, despite the result, our home form and away form suggest otherwise. I think the side tonight is built for away games and countering, whereas we need more technical control. Yeah, I think you're right overall. What I was speaking about specifically was that midfield, specifically in this game, because the way that they lined up, there was no player who you thought would control the. I mean, Paquetá did it in the end. He dropped deep and schooled Bruno in a pretty flawless second half performance from his perspective. But you wouldn't expect that. You would think he would be higher up the pitch, is what I'm saying, alongside Soler, that they would try and turn. Their game plan was to try and turn Newcastle, which they did, but it was ultimately that um, that was where Newcastle should have been. Longstaff closing those spaces down, Bruno dictating the play, playing it forward, and Willett breaking the lines. We've seen all three of those players do those things in recent weeks, and there was a really great opportunity to do it. And I think that came from the mentality thing, and we've spoken about on this channel. By the way, like the stream because it really does help, and subscribe to the channel as well if you haven't already, for more content coming in the next few days. I think, I think my biggest issue from the game was the mentality issue. After going 1-0 down, I think I don't. It was so blatant. It was so blatant and obvious and clear what happened that they just, as soon as the goal went in, they just collapsed and their intensity dropped, their mentality was on the floor, and West Ham sensed an opportunity. As I say, it happened again in the second half when Bowen nearly scored or had a shot on goal, and Pope made a save. I also think as well for the second goal that Pope, as poor as it was, and the first goal was obviously Lloyd Kelly's perspective as well. The second goal, I think Pope can do better as well. John says technical control games is something we haven't evolved as a squad to do yet. Hall probably the best player at it. I agree. I think Hall. I think he had a difficult night tonight. I think that Somerville and I know Somerville was on the left against Livramento. He had a good game. Who was on the right for West Ham again? Remind me. But Soler got into pockets of space, and what I thought the midfield did really well. Bowen, it was Bowen who gave Hall a difficult night. But what I thought was really good was Wan-Bissaka coming into that midfield space. Soler picking up those spaces in between. Where if you watched my video reaction to the Arsenal game, I said that Livramento did really well picking up those spaces against Arsenal, in between the sort of like half spaces in between the midfield and the right hand side that fullbacks often pick up, but also centre midfielders can run into those spaces. And I thought that was what West Ham really did well to sort of turn Newcastle over. Really, just I think tactically you've got to credit West Ham, but I don't know what you guys think. But for me, it should be fairly unacceptable for any team to come to Newcastle in the way that they have been at home, one defeat in 13. That's only the third defeat at home in the league in 2024. There is a sort of like caveat to that they just lost to Forest at the end of last year, and they also drew with I think Luton and a couple of others, and had some disappointing results at home in that process as well. But no team, like especially West Ham, shouldn't be able to come here and dictate to Newcastle how to play, because Newcastle have been so good at home generally when they're up to their best. That's how it works. And I thought, as good as West Ham have been, that was really, really poor to allow that to happen from Newcastle's perspective. And as I say, the thing is that they had the game plan. The game, it's rare that you see a game sort of switch in terms of the pattern so quickly, and especially in 15 minutes. Once 15 minutes sort of hits the game, sort of once the pattern sort of finds itself, that's how it generally lasts. But the goal completely changed it. It made West Ham confident enough to sort of believe in themselves to as I say, go through the lines like they did, but also sit deeper and contain Newcastle better than they were in the first 15 minutes. But crucially, I think it stopped Newcastle being brave enough to get the ball in behind and get the ball out wide, which they were doing in the first 15 minutes. I mean, why were they not? I mean, Isak literally scored from the from that ball through. It was offside, but he scored from that ball through, and then met a couple of different ones as well. Gordon had a couple of runs at Wan-Bissaka that all stopped after sort of 15 minutes and didn't really restart. And every time Newcastle tried to build an attack, the distribution was also really poor. I thought Share wasn't good in possession as he usually is. A couple of little stray passes out wide in the second half to Barnes that just really were poor. Midfield currently has two that aren't brilliant ball players that can unlock sides, Jonathan and Sean. Therefore, wing play and fullbacks are our attackers. It's too predictable. I think this is a long-standing issue, isn't it, for Newcastle, that they've been here before with this, in terms of they've been in this position where they're in this transitional phase, and that of playing between different systems, whether they with the ball high and counter press and play with intensity as they did second half against Forest, particularly. It really felt like a performance of 22-23. Arsenal a little bit like that as well for different reasons, but they're this sort of change to the. You're right. I think John's right. I think the change to the impetus in midfield and desire of how to play from pressing to possession is predicated literally on Tonali, who doesn't get into the team. So Bruno's good at it, but he's not. But he's doing it all by himself and trying to be a 6 and an 8 at the same time. So he gets caught out quite sometimes, and when the pass doesn't work, he's the only one who's trying that. I think that's a really, really good point that John's made. It's predicated on Tonali being in the team, and Tonali can't get into the team. And when he does, there's not enough. One player can't make all that difference by himself, and it's like the squad was built towards this really sort of progressive, pressing way of playing 2 years ago, and then even though the squad's makeup hasn't changed, the approach seems to, and these moments seem to happen quite a lot, because there was a lot in that game that reminded me of Brighton as well, earlier in the season, in terms of that makeup, and it is really difficult. And Jamie's made a good point again. It's worrying that none of the subs really made a positive impact. Another big thing before the game was how good the subs were. The subs bench looked, wasn't it? We had Murphy on there, Barnes on there, Almiron on there, Trippier on there, Wilson on there, Tonali on there. That's as strong as you can get. I don't think, Botman aside, really, how many players. I know Burn was missing, but like in terms of like Newcastle's strongest team on paper, the only player missing was Botman. And I don't think it was a defensive issue. Admittedly, I think Mikel Antonio had a really good game today, really bullied. I thought Lloyd Kelly was poor. And again, I say again because I thought actually he was very good against Chelsea in his last game, but I thought he was poor. I thought Antonio bullied both him and Cher, held the ball up well, again, connected really well with Soler and Paquetá, Souček getting forward as well. And then the two wingers. That link-up play was completely what Newcastle were missing throughout the entire second, last 75 minutes of the game, because it was there in that first 50 minutes. As I say, it just confuses me so much that they just won that goal, conceding that goal, just knocked them for 6 in terms of confidence. West Ham with the quality of Paquetá, number 10, Bowen, Somerville, who all looked really creative. Gordon, Barnes, Joelinton aren't really creative forwards. I think there's a lot to be said to that. There's a lot of direct running and power and athleticism in those games. But I was thinking this to myself watching the games over the weekend. Two players that Newcastle were really interested in the last summer that they bought Tonali. James Maddison scored twice at Manchester City while getting forward into the box and creating a bit of havoc on the break. And Dominic Szoboszlai scored a goal for Liverpool, again picking up those pockets and linking the play. Newcastle need, I think it's not been said enough, but someone to offer something a little bit different in the squad. I think they've got midfielders who are all roughly very similar in terms of get the ball, pass the ball, as has been said, and they have quite a few. They have Barnes and I think actually you could make a case that all of those four wingers, Barnes and Gordon and Almiron and Murphy on the other side, and actually Joe Linton as well, in a slightly different way, are all sort of runners. They don't create anything in terms of they don't get play. They're not gonna create something out of nothing. Is what I'm trying to say. And Newcastle don't really have a player like that. They don't have a number 10, a sort of player who can unlock a team in the way that that, as I say, Maddison, when he's on form, has done for Spurs, and Szoboszlai did for for Liverpool. And it was really interesting that although they were sort of seen as sort of inverted wingers who could come and play off the right hand side, that was how they were sort of pitched at the time. It's a long sort of like time ago, but it really does sort of feel like what they would have really brought is that sort of ability to just pick different pockets of space, because they do have, as I say, Tonali, Bruno, Willock, Tonali, Bruno, Longstaff, who are very good at who are all very sort of at different levels, and they offer different things. I'm not trying to say that they're all the same player by any means, but they're all sort of traditional central midfielders where they pick the ball up and they give it, and they give it to they're supposed to give it to creative players. And I think there is a gap in the squad between those sort of giving it to and the players who sort of run at the team at the opposition. There's no ingenuity, and I think Odegaard's a really, really good example of somebody who gives that, who gives the team a bit of ingenuity. Because actually, if you look at what Arsenal do, they're no longer this sort of. There's a lot of talk about Arteta no longer being the sort of Pep disciple that he used to be, and trying to sort of mimic what Guardiola does and play the same way. He's more like, structured defensively, set pieces, sort of keeping it tight, breaking, and it works really well because you've got Saka who goes on one side, and you've got Martinelli who can go on the other side, and knitting together it all, Odegaard in the midfield, alongside somebody like Rice who can dictate the ball, dictate the play, and tidy things up deeper in midfield. So Newcastle have a lot of the sort of tidying up and controlling, and they have a lot of the runners, but they have nothing in that middle bit. And I think maybe that's an issue, because that maybe that's what needs sorting, and maybe then, and also because I think as well, that's why they're so wedded to 4-3-3, because there's nothing else you can do unless you're going to play someone out of position in that number 10 role. Arda Güler as on loan as an option. I think I'd love that. I'd love that. All I'm going to say is on Football Manager, I did buy Arda Güler, and he does exactly that thing for me on Football Manager. I know it's not the same thing, but the legitimate point about it is it's about somebody who can, as I say, maybe not necessarily start in that position, and maybe this will be what the video will be about tomorrow. I don't know. I haven't quite decided yet. I don't know if I'm going to do it on what Newcastle needed or what West Ham did to impact the midfield. I'm not sure yet, but that's why they're wedded to 4-3-3, because they have no other option to change it. If they had a Maddison or a Szoboszlai or a Odegaard or a Güler, and whoever's watching this back, they're mentioned in the chat. Of those are the four players that we've spoken about. I'm not saying that Newcastle have a chance of going out and buying any of those players, but if you had those players in the squad, then there's someone who can do that. Then there's that option to do something. And there's lots of talk about the number 6 role, but there would be no need for a number 6. I don't think, if they're able to play a double pivot in a deeper sort of 4-2-3-1, which just doesn't work at the moment, because there's nobody who can effectively play in that number 10 role. There's nobody who can do it, because you need somebody who can unlock a door in a way that I think, yes, you could say Bruno can do it, but he does it deeper. And if you bring him away from being a number 6 all the way to being a number 10, that just wouldn't suit him. Tonali's kind of the same. So I think going forward, maybe if there was a number 10 in the squad, you could have Bruno and Tonali as a pivot, and then a number 10 just to offer something a bit different, because the squad is very samey. If you look at that, as you say, like as good as Gordon and Barnes are, and as good as Murphy and Almiron have been at different times for Newcastle, they're all very much the same type of thing. They're all very much runners who pick the ball. No one's creating anything. And the same with the midfield. Tonali, Longstaff, and Bruno are all players who dictate the play and don't do much else. I say don't do much else, but they don't do much else higher up the pitch. John says, I'm surprised we've not tried more formations like a box of midfield of 4 just to change things up. Isak always looks so isolated. I think that's because the squad is so. I've said before in previous videos and things that Eddie Howe's too wedded to the system, and he needs to become a principals manager rather than a systems manager. Because that's what the top managers are these days. They're all principals managers. Like if you look at Guardiola, is that the evolution of his Man City team between 2017 and now. I know they're having struggles now, but like the team it's a completely different team in terms of how they play. They do different things. They've got Haaland up front when they played a false 9, but structurally and principally, they still win the ball back in 5 seconds. They still play the ball really. They still dominate possession. They still play through creative wingers, and they still have overlaps and overloads in midfield. That's always been the case, but they look a very different team because the system's changed and the approach has changed, but the principles stay the same. Eddie Howe is very much wedded to 4-3-3 and that same system, and maybe he needs to find a way to change it. We're all being very FM minded. Could we have a midfield 3 like suited? Could we see a midfield 3 suited to Sandro Milan, Sandro as Bruno as Benacer, and Erdegaard, Szoboszlai, and Gula fighting out for number 10? That would have been nice. I think this is kind of it. I just think there's been a lot of talk of that number 6 role, but the only reason that the number 6 is needed is because they're playing so high up in the. They're playing so openly with that 3 in midfield, and they're trying to fit very same midfielders in 3 positions. Why not? Whereas if you had a number 10 who could play in the 4-2-3-1, then suddenly the midfield sort of sorts itself out because it's naturally more compact and naturally a lot more structured. And Newcastle don't even have the option to do that. And I think ultimately that's what the problem is. For me anyway. I'm gonna drop. I think I'm gonna close this down now, guys. Thanks so much for joining me. I'll be back tomorrow with my analysis video dropping in the morning, and also I think I did say possibly a transfer live either this week or next as well. Thanks very much for joining me, and I'll see you tomorrow for the analysis video. Cheers, guys. Good night.